Good morning, everybody. I really look forward to this panel discussion. I've been preparing for this panel discussion for over a week now. When I saw who some of the panelists were, I immediately started cracking away at research. And one of the first things I did was I called a friend of mine, very good friend of mine, who's a co-founder to Kusini, actually. And I said to him, I just did a sort of check-in. I was like, hey, man, how's business? And he asked me why. I was like, well, I've got a panel discussion coming up, and Murendeni is one of the panelists. And I've tracked Kusini's journey from the start. And he says to me, well, I don't have much time to talk right now, but the most important thing you should know is that we have 4 patents. And that's where the conversation ended. And we've spoken about the patent journey and just how antiquated the South African legislative and policy framework is. And so when Marie-Francoise spoke about the Tunisia case, about how within a matter of months legislative reform took place, I was envious, right? That is my area of work for the last 10 years. My first engagement with policy and legislative framework was when I was in university. I was one of the founders of Engineers Without Borders, and we were young and ambitious and thought we were innovative. We designed a apple seed reactor, right, which means it can react to just about anything in your home. And we decided we're going to create a biodiesel reactor that is the size of your geyser, your household geyser. You're going to take your waste cooking oil and you're going to turn that into diesel and you're going to use it for whatever reason. And we thought this is a brilliant idea. We're going to get this into retail. We're going to be incredibly rich. We're going to revolutionize the energy space. And there was at least 1 million compliance, legislative, and policy boxes that we had to tick. And that idea died right in its tracks. And that's where I want to start the conversation today. I worked in government as a policy advisor to a minister. I work in the policy advisory space at the moment. One of the most interesting cases I'm working on is advising rhino farm owners on how to pass conservation legislation in South Africa. They believe it's a R1 trillion industry over the next 5 years. And they believe conservation is the future that will save the South African economy. But it's an antiquated system, no matter what industry you go to. And last night was the first time I heard about the Startup Act from Christoph. So I perhaps want to start there, and I'll start with the founder, Murendeni. Corporate open innovation is a really nice buzzword, right? But it's all but a dream if there isn't infrastructure in place that's stimulated. And so I want to speak about investment structure and culture, but let's start there around the infrastructure that speaks to the structure of it. In your journey with Kusini, what was missing in policy support, legislative support, private sector support, that if you had those pieces of support, it would have fast-tracked your journey, you would have scaled to where you imagined Kusini to be, and it would be the water solution for Africa?
Yo, that's such a difficult question. I mean, first and foremost, I think one of the biggest things is when you think about, especially a startup such as ours. So our biggest challenge is that we are creating a startup that is addressing a social challenge that we've got. Almost 1 billion people lack access to safe drinking water. In South Africa, almost 11 million people do not have access to clean water. And out of the 11 million people that you're solving the water challenge for, majority of the people can't necessarily pay for the solution that we're providing. So we're providing a technology solution that majority of our users can't pay for. So we need to think about how do we ensure that the solution that we are developing is used by the people that need it the most but can't pay for that solution. So we think about it as so that's why we think about it as a social enterprise. But in South Africa, there is no such thing as a social enterprise. There's no act that allows for a social enterprise, so you need to register both as a NPO and register as a PTO Ltd. It's a difficult process from a tax point of view, compliance point of view, and just the way that you operate a business. So that's the first and foremost thing. When we're going into looking for investment to scale our business, one of the biggest things that you look at. So when we go out to look for an investment, if you go into a typical VC, they're obviously going to first and foremost look at your revenue as a PTO Ltd, as an organization that they're going to be investing in. But we are two organizations. We are a P2 Ltd and an NPO because we are addressing a social issue using an enterprise. But because it's not necessarily recognized as a structure, both those two organizations will have to exist as two different organizations. When you go for an investment, you can't go and say invest in two different organizations at the same time. So you have to invest in the P2 Ltd. But the P2 Ltd is a structure that exists with a social enterprise. So that's a difficult thing to start with. Secondly, when it comes to especially access to clean water in South Africa, that's a duty of a government. The government has to provide access to clean water. There is no act that allows for private sector to provide access to clean water. So how do we then go and partner with either the government, which is a very difficult thing because you have to go through a tendering process and bidding and all those things, or corporate sectors that are looking to play a part in the communities that they operate in. So when I started, it was a huge thing to think about where exactly do we fit in? Are we going to be a utility? Or are we going to be a private sector that offers a solution to possibly people that can't afford to buy that solution? So that's where the biggest challenge came in. So we had to innovate our business model.
Last night I was telling Christoph, in South Africa it takes about 6 years on average to pass any piece of legislation. On average, 6 years. And by the time your legislation passed, there's a new president. It presents a unique opportunity. And the president we have now has recognized just how slow that process is. So he replaced passing legislation with this new thing that he calls, and Jean-Claude will love this, a social compact. Jean-Claude participates in many of these social compacts. It's a frustrating process. Is it a sufficient mechanism to replacing the slow movement of changing the law and creating the necessary policy framework? So that's to say, Marie-Francoise speaks about a relationship between government, private sector, industry, and labor, right? You work in those policy framework spaces. Is it a sufficient replacement, or do we just need to get on with the business of changing the law, changing the policies, and creating a streamline for it?
It's a never-ending story. You know, it's true that in EDLAC we have all those elements, and we are working on all those elements. But it's a long journey, and does it work? Yeah. And it's a very long journey, and I think it's not only a South African problematic. I will say, all around the planet we face the same difficulty. So I think the key point for big corporate as us is first and foremost to find our own roots. Sometimes to forget about patents, but to go more on process specificity, and like this. You get much quicker time to market, and I think this is important. And when we talk about tech, is clearly speaking a key element, because agility and speed is a key element. So, and secondly, from time to time, is effectively to push, to advocate with the stakeholders. It's a long journey, and even if you make a very smaller process, as the president is trying to do, you know, all around the planet, it doesn't work so well. So I'm not quite sure it's the answer. So last point I wanted to say is also, at least for a corporate as mine, and as many big corporates, is also to have, what can I say, venturing discussions with some stakeholders, some startups that are out of our premises, to try to accelerate and to get ideas that we don't have in-house, or we'll never have in-house. And to have win-win interest, I will say. Sometimes equity, but sometimes just win-win interest. We accelerate the growth of somebody to accelerate to one. And I think this is a bit what I wanted to say. For the rest, we can discuss hours with governments, you know, from time to time.
Yeah, and sometimes when we get despondent with this slow pace which government moves, so we go do our own thing in a little corner. We mobilize as many stakeholders as we possibly can. We put together a fund, and we start getting on with the business of solving these problems. And we see a lot of this happen in Africa. Lelemba, you have a 100 million rand fund. How difficult was it to put that together and convince the people whose money you were asking for that you will be solving real problems that are profitable in an environment where so much of our money falls into a black hole? You start a business and you realize, oh, I can't get the license for this and I can't get the license for that. I'm sure you struggled with water licenses or whatever the case may be. How do you convince those people that despite the government being so antiquated and snail-paced, we're going to do good with your money?
That's a great question. I've had the privilege of working in government, in large corporate, growing a startup, and then getting into the investment space. And so understanding all of these spaces was critical to getting to where I decided that I want to put together a fund, and that fund will focus specifically on investing in women entrepreneurs, where we saw the biggest gap. And so in terms of raising funds, I think one of the most telling things is that when I started on the journey, I deliberately did not even bother to raise in South Africa. So that is telling. That's just because everything is slow. There's so much regulation that you have to follow. You're thinking about, where am I going to have my fund domiciled? South Africa is not the most attractive. And even when you talk to international stakeholders, it's just about, oh, but there is so much policy and around IP. There's issues around movement of money with South Africa. And so you see how sometimes inflexible policies, or policies that are so difficult to change, impact the different spheres. And we're all trying to work together. We want to work with the government, we want to work with corporate, we want to work with startups and investors. But if one part of that wheel is moving really slowly, it really impacts the rest of it. And so with raising the fund, my focus was more on highlighting the opportunities, which are many, because Africa is not short of problems, and in each problem we see an opportunity. And so it was highlighting the opportunities, highlighting the gaps. Marie-Francoise mentioned that the biggest gap that we're seeing is investment into people of color and investment into women. And so there lies a big opportunity as well to really see how do you contribute to closing that gap, but within that space, positioning it that this is a high return space, and it's not something that we're thinking about as a charity case. And we've had great businesses since. We've invested in 10 businesses since October 2019.
Yeah.
And they're flourishing. And so the more...
Yeah, that deserves a round of applause.
And I guess the more you show those use cases and those success stories, the better it is for fundraising. And so our own fundraising journey continues, but having those success stories is a big contributor to making that happen.
All right, Francoise, I want to ask you this. Government often engages with the various stakeholders, and oftentimes they are under the impression they're engaging against their own interests. So I'll give an example of that. Jobs is an issue in South Africa. It's an issue in Southern Africa. You touched on it, looking at the numbers in Eswatini, Lesotho, South Africa, Namibia, and Botswana. And the South African government has perhaps the most important mandate of its time is getting people back into jobs. Youth unemployment in South Africa is 56%. Overall unemployment, expanded definition, is sitting at 34%. That means 1 in 3 South Africans are unemployed. The vast majority of them being black and women. And this is why your fund is so important, Lelemba. But so when government then says, oh, we're going to put together a startup act, oh, it's going to make it easier for disruptors to disrupt and get innovation into a pipeline that will change the way we do things and make these organizations successful. But yeah, man, the vast majority of these organizations are going to take people out of their jobs, right? Antoine, good friend of Christophe, founder of FinChatBot, for instance, has an amazing machine that can replace every bank teller there is in South Africa in an instance, right? Because it does through AI what bank tellers were to do. Government doesn't get excited by ideas like that, despite being disruptive. How do we move the conversation? And you speak to prime ministers, presidents, government leaders all the time, and they're concerned about jobs no matter where in the world they are. How then do you get them to negotiate legislative framework that doesn't act in their own interest? Protecting jobs would be the example here.
Yeah, so many jobs can be created in other areas. So we need first to give the assurance of the government that making this decision does not mean that it is the end of all. But more importantly, I think that based on my experience, we need to focus on specific issues. As Jean-Claude mentioned, the issue, and you yourself mentioned, the delay to adopt laws is long everywhere. But we just need to identify this particular issue that can make a difference, So in that particular, and this is why I suggested to have the advocacy the group that would say, well, we have to go to government to say, you are saying that, there are issues of jobs, but we can tell you that if you change this particular point, we can make a difference. So I'm not talking of the big NEDLAC where we meet, every month and you want to resolve everything under the sun, but take a particular case and try to address it. That would be my proposal. You mentioned water. It's quite interesting. During the COVID, you had to carry, trucks of water everywhere. Does that make sense? Honestly, So I think that now we need maybe taking that, and I started on this very point, so it was very interesting to listen to you, to talk to a few policymakers to say, in this post-COVID, rebuilding differently, perhaps you now need to consider that the private sector can deliver this water and not the municipalities, because the municipality cannot do it. So my approach would be to say, let us use this municipality who would be able and ready to try it, because I believe in the demonstration effect. So perhaps, take very specific, have a demonstration effect, and based on that, try to scale up.
Okay, let's talk about the role the private sector plays. I imagine if I'm going to be delivering water to people during COVID, something that is a government mandate, and I don't get paid on time, my business is going to suffer, right? Naturally, I would be paid by the people who hold the mandate to deliver the water, which is the government. You say, for instance, the World Bank went into a compact with Business Unity South Africa, and the compact is we'll pay small businesses, or all businesses, within 30 days. These sort of compacts exist everywhere, and there are all these ad hoc ancillary organizations, all the way from Business Unity South Africa to Business Leadership South Africa to the Black Business Forum to the Small Enterprise Business Forum, and there are so many of them, and now you have to sit around the table. What should be a board meeting turns into a seminar because you have to negotiate with everybody. Is that effective, Marie-Francoise, in those small little steps where we're negotiating with people who aren't the government to make sure that people are being paid, when really the problem lies at the heart of how the state functions?
No, you are absolutely right. But again, and to stay on the example that you gave, and I looked at it because, after all, I am also a customer here in South Africa. I live in South Africa. And I realized people pay. And actually, people pay. When you say that they cannot afford, if you go in every African countries, when people buy a bucket of water and you put it in cubic meter, it's probably 10 times the official price. So people are paying and they are ready to pay. So I think that when I was saying, and I fully agree with you, that it should not be a fragmentation to talk here and here, but I'm trying to say is that let us take a set of issues. Because if you take everything, it is massive. So, for example, to say, you are serious in South Africa, we see that there is no job creation. There are maybe 1 million youth coming in the market every year, and the jobs are not created. So we have a problem. So the future is on entrepreneurship. But you need to go back to them to say, how are you going to change that? To be fair, the government has put the BIS portal, and I would like to ask you, how have you tried it? How did you find it user-friendly? But I went online, it seems to be easier. So there are some steps that are being taken, but my submission is to say, let us take a set of issues and try to look at them together. Secondly, and you did mention the fragmentation, it is a problem. We are also issuing a report. It's not that South Africa is not putting money in entrepreneurship, but the programs are so fragmented. Department of Small Business Development has a program. Agriculture has a program. Department of Science and Innovation has a program. Technology, and the whole is less than the sum of the parts. So this is why my second submission that I have put on the table is that can we have this community started with a digital platform? First of all, when you are, maybe I would ask to the startup here, when you look for information, do you find it? Where do you find, yet you meet funds, they said, oh, but we have money, but we don't find business opportunities. So the way I think to resolve the issue that you are suggesting, in my view, is to bring everybody around already, and thanks to technology now, and we learn through COVID, it's been more than a year that I'm working from my house. And I can tell you that probably I'm working more than when I was going to the office. So you can use the technology to have the information available and then see how to bring people around these critical issues.
How do we do that, Jean-Claude? How do we stop the fragmentation and make it streamlined? and say to Department of Small Business, Science and Technology, Department of Trade and Industry, hey, let's pool our resources together in a way that makes sense.
You know, there is something that is a bit particular. If I go just to infrastructure, political infrastructure in South Africa, we've had critics. There is no intergovernment people. You know, in any countries, in a government, you have people sharing information from Mr. Minister X to Mr. Y, Mr. Z. It doesn't exist in South Africa. Each minister is responsible for his, between bracket, area. And so what, by the way, doesn't allow any relation, and we know that, for example, digital is obviously impacting each and every element, but jobs, you were talking, technologies, process. So I think it starts from there. I mean, to change a bit the structure and not to have somebody in charge of SOEs, somebody of agriculture, somebody of what, but also to have intergovernment. Later on is what the government, I think, is doing well in South Africa. You know, there are many areas where they are listening and discussing with the business. You know, I think it's one of the countries in the world when I see much more proximity of the government and the business to try to find globally solution. But now is to, as Marie-Francoise was stating, to take some key points and to try to solve them one by one, instead of getting more, I would say, theoretical thematic. And this, I think, is a key element. And many big corporate, many also startup, many entrepreneurs here are ready to support, I'm sure, on our topics. But you know, I can take one example just to finish on that. For example, is about skills, you know. Skills is a key problematic of South Africa. I'm sorry to say, you know, we have many unemployed people, but at the same time, if you take also the people skills linked to that, you have also a very big problem. So how do we upskill people, young generation, to be later entrepreneur or to enter corporate or to go on? And here the private sector can help. You know, we have universities, we have things inside our companies where we can help much more than we are doing today.
So just to build on that, if I may, because
go ahead.
It's something that I've proposed in my various countries, Morocco, Tunisia, and here I started to put that, building on what Jean-Claude said, to get out the verticality, you know, of the approach, is to propose collaborative leadership around critical issues. So saying, because of course, if you have to address a job issue, as he said, you need to have people that are trained. Then you need also to have, you know, entrepreneurs that can start their business. So you start seeing, you know, the pieces coming together. So my submission to the government, and I've been putting it, it's how do you organize, you know, collaborative leadership? In other words, to say, how do we work together to address complex issues? But not too complex to the extent that you cannot get out of your starting board, but really pulling. And it is success. It can prove successful if we achieve that. So we are suggesting that.
I read in the Africa Arena report, foreign direct investment into Africa down 18% in 2020, but early stage venture capital funding is up in total transactions by 44%, while in total value being down by 28%. Moody's, 4 days ago, Moody's released their credit rating on South Africa, saying, look, we're not going to change where we score you guys, but there's a little bit of optimism we have about you. Do you feel, Lelemba, that optimism exists throughout the world as someone that had to pull together a fund, traveling the world and asking people to put their money into South Africa? Is that optimism there? And if it is, how do we capitalize on it?
Yeah, the optimism is definitely there. I think that from an international fundraising perspective, there's a lot of excitement about Africa overall. There's recognition that we've got the 4 key ecosystems being South Africa, Nigeria, Egypt, and Kenya. And so there is enthusiasm. The gap remains in you know, information and feeling uncertain around where is it going to get invested? Will we get a return? Are we able to actually get our money out in these type of environments? Because our environments are ever changing. And so we've had to be creative as VCs as well in terms of thinking about how do we think of our regions more as blocks, because it makes them a lot more attractive. Like if I'm just putting South Africa alone, there's gonna be so many questions around, you know, how do we move our money out, all that stuff. If I put it as a SADC block, it's a lot more attractive to international investors. And to your question on, you know, the fragmentation and bringing key players together. I think that's the spaces where like the likes of the World Bank can really come to play, because each department honestly is thinking about how do they look good, you know, in their individual capacity, how do they look good? And we kind of need the big organizations like the World Bank to galvanize that type of energy for collaboration. In our space, this is where we're asking DFIs to come in. We know, for example, that there's this gap in investment into women. However, all the time when you are speaking to DFIs, it's like, oh, but you're a first-time female fund manager investing in women, there's nervousness. And you're trying to think, but you are the leaders, and you should be, you know, putting not just policy in place around how do we diversify investment, but taking that step to put your money where your mouth is. And so there's a critical role that larger bodies like development finance institutions can play in creating that excitement, but in terms of like anecdote and the energy that is out there, Africa is definitely being seen as the next frontier. And with us now starting to see some key exits in each of the regions, huge mergers and acquisitions in each of the regions, there's confidence that there are exits for investors' money. And we're excited, and that's why you're seeing so much more activity in the VC space. Yeah.
I want to open the floor for questions just now. So we've touched on the investment part of it. We've touched on the structural part of it. Let's speak about culture. Murendeni, it's one thing if we get the infrastructure and the investment right. It's another having actual good ideas and having people step up with those good ideas, right? How do we create a culture where that collaboration is not just at the top, but it's bottom up, right? How do we get 1, 2, 3 tutors there in the back to say, look, we've got a brilliant idea that will solve educational crisis in South Africa, especially during a pandemic. Let's go have a chat with the Minister of Finance and see if we can get you know, some money into this and scale this through the state infrastructure. But the idea has to be bottom up. Are founders excited to collaborate, or do they all just want to work in silos? Is there a culture of let's make this happen?
Yeah, I suppose that's quite difficult because of the fact that, for example, going back to the COVID and water situation, you know, you mentioned that Nhlanganisi, our co-founder, said we've got 4 patents. 2 of those patents were paid for by government, by the Department of Science Innovation, because you know how expensive it is to file a patent. So last year when COVID hit, the government spent close to 500 million rands on tanks, on water tanks. 75% of those water tanks are lost right now.
Wow.
So the Department of Science Innovation invests money in an innovation that can allow for access to clean water. But the Department of Science and Innovation, when we reach out to government within the structures of government, because of that, just that lack of cohesion and collaboration within government, it's not, there's 0% chance of science and innovation, that investment that the government made being known by Department of Water Affairs. I mean, the chances are there, not 0%, but it's very, very difficult for the Department of Water Affairs to know that Department of Science and Innovation invested a lot of money in this innovation that can allow them to not waste 400 million rands. Do you know what I mean? So as much as the will and the excitement is there for the collaboration, without that, especially when it comes to government and things such as education, health, and water, which a lot of that has to come back down to government, it's very, very difficult because of that, just that lack of collaboration within government. But the exciting thing is that the more you, especially when it comes to innovation, the more we present that innovation, the more corporate partners come in, and the more that helps the corporate companies come in, the more we are able to scale our organization to greater heights, and the more government will then be able to come back. So it's not all lost, it's not a lost cause, but the challenge right now is how do you get the train to start moving? And for us, it was just that question. How do we get this train to start moving in a position where government can now be sort of forced to start buying into the solution itself? There is,
in the meantime, what are founders supposed to do?
Work a lot with corporate partners. I don't know, Christoph, you might have an answer for this one.
do you have an answer, Lelemba? In the interim, while we wait for this big machine to start getting oiled and working, what are founders to do? Where do they find that environment that allows for that innovation to come to life?
Yeah, I think they keep on doing what they're doing because they're natural problem solvers. But I think this is a space where corporate can play a big part as well. And this is looking at it both from being a buyer as a corporate to incubating some of the smaller businesses and seeing how that can support their own innovation. At some point, a corporate becomes big and fat and lazy, and they don't have the time and space to start really running as fast as they would like to do so. And that's where there is space for bringing on board, innovative young startups that can complement their products, but also just create avenues for them to innovate and bring in fresh ideas that they might not be thinking about. It's really a four-piece puzzle, and none of them is going to work in isolation. And so that we don't sound like we've just been shooting government. Governments are doing a lot of great work, particularly in spaces like fintech. If you look in South Africa right now, there is a regulatory sandbox focused around credit and being creative around identities, particularly like digital identities for people, and creating new credit models. This is the same as in Zambia. That's the same thing that's happening. And so there is space for creating those type of sandboxes to see, experiment in a controlled environment, and it is happening. It's just about how do we bring it all together, these four pieces, so that they work a lot more efficiently.
Jean-Claude, I'll ask you that, and I'll bring you in there, Marie-Francoise. Yes, I'll ask you a question. I asked a lady from Microsoft yesterday. The relationship between founders, startups, the disruptors, and big, fat, lazy corporates is often one of distrust, right? It's often one at, if I have a brilliant idea, I'm not going to take it to Vodacom and tell them, creator, please call me, because they're going to steal it, make billions off it, and not give me anything from that. How do we bridge that trust gap to create that inflow of innovation and an outflow, a funnel for it, so to speak?
I want to say, in a big corporate as mine, it's 40 billion euro, 200,000 people, so it's a big corporate. So first we are making innovation by yourself, so I think this is important. And here it's all about diversity, many people in reality inside working with accountability and also empowerment. So we are doing that. But we have a second leg. Second leg is, for example, Christophe knows it, we have an internal company called Nova, ourselves incubating, partnering with startups all around the planet, trying to find all ideas that we cannot develop by ourselves. Because basically we are very centered, very focused on our technology, on our processes, and from time we forgot, obviously speaking, to listen, to hear low signals, and also we are lacking technology or lacking processes. And so for that, we go and cherry pick, discuss with startup, go on investing in equity also to them. We are for example, today with a free startup in South Africa, where we are for innovative construction methodology, where we are equity partner and we are also business partners. So this is how the big corporate can play a role. And many big corporates are doing it in reality, just to tell it.
Marie-Francoise, talk to me about the trust deficit, because you also have to deal with this trust deficit, right? The World Bank raises his hand, says we're going to make available X billion rand for X country to solve X problem. People are like, no, you and the rest of the Bretton Woods institutions are here to colonize us again. How do you overcome that trust deficit?
Yeah, actually, before I respond to that, I want to build on what you were saying, both because the Department of Science and Innovation actually reached out to us. They have a fund, and they said, well, we know that as a public institution, we don't know how to do it well. So how you can help us? So I find that just to be also encouraging, as you say, they are coming, and they've been attending all the webinars, and we are trying, actually they've joined us in the Corporate Innovation Challenge that is going to be launched next week. I'm making a little commercial, if some of you are interested. And they are coming there. So my second point is that probably, for example, I didn't know your innovation. So we have a lack of information. So this is why, Christophe, when we are talking of this platform to bring the startups, where is innovation happening? How easily can I get this information so that I don't have to dig and search? Of course, now I know through Google we can get a lot. So let us think of a way to bring all the innovation to the floor. And maybe you could start working with one provincial government, maybe one provincial government gets it, but this can address my needs, because in some sense, as politicians, the elections are coming, in October? So if they can show that they have improved access to water, aren't they going to be good for them? It seems to me. So I think let us think, as we move into this conversation throughout the day, how to bring this element. Now the trust, yes. I mean, of course, first of all, we have to know each other. Because I realize that most people, when they talk about the World Bank, they think of the World Bank of the 80s, where we were based in Washington. In the 80s, you didn't have a country director. Indeed, decisions were made in Washington, but things have changed. So we have to go present that we are more than an institution. We are people. Behind this institution, there are people with sentiments. We understand the issues. And I think it's also the same thing both between the private sector and the public sector. Find platform when people get to know each other. And then I also believe in the demonstration effect. Do something that works. And they say, oh, wow, but, there is a solution. Oh, we managed to do something well. Actually, as much as what they are saying about the World Bank, they actually come to us because one of our strengths is the analytics, our capacity to analyze things, and they come to us from that. Now we want to move beyond that, in the case of South Africa, to say, you are a member of the World Bank. China is the largest user of the World Bank funds. Actually, we are stopping to give money to China. China was using the South Africa allocation, but they know how to do it intelligently to say what we want to get from the World Bank is indeed to strengthen our capacity. In terms of pollution, they were the worst in the world. Now they are moving as part of, the Paris Agreement. They have their nationally determined, and they are using the World Bank. Another area, they said, well, we didn't know how to do procurement. This didn't mean anything to us. But we came to the World Bank because we saw that in having procurement, we have better value for money. We put competition in, So it's really developing this trust in a very constructive and structured manner. And I think that we are moving in that direction.
That's good news. That's very good news. I'm going to take some questions. I'm going to take 3 questions. Keep it under 1 minute, and we'll have the panel respond after the 3 questions. There's a hand over there. There's a hand over there.
Oliver, can I just answer Murendeni's question, and then I quickly like to tell
Yes, you can answer the
story.
question. Third hand, this side of the room. Third hand, this side of the room. Okay, only 2 hands. Go ahead.
Yeah, so on what Murendeni just mentioned, I think how to solve the issue, I really believe in a small win strategy. So we run a dozen Open Innovation Challenge every year at Africa Arena. Last year, Kusini Water won the Air France KLM Challenge, which was about deploying purification water solution to avoid Air France to fly water from Paris every time they go to Africa for the return trip, because that's what they do, burning fuel and obviously emitting carbon in the process. The prime is obviously Air France KLM being in a difficult situation, had no money to fund the proof of concept past the challenge. But they were ready to deploy the solution at one of their airports to really try it out, giving it a proof of concept. So we then went to one of our other partners, DHL, and asked them, can you help? And South Africa has this incentive on enterprise money tax credits. So they use that. They are funding the pilot, which Murendeni and this team will be deploying in Dakar next month. And I think if it's successful, then maybe Lelemba will be keen to invest in Kusini Water. And maybe, the Department of Science and Technology will say, hey, why don't we, if this is used on a major international route at the Dakar airport, surely we should look at it. So it's just a little anecdote, but, small win strategy, always good.
I think that answers the point of in other startups, how can we think about the solution that you're developing, in the meantime it applying to other adjacent users, not necessarily the main government? Can we solve this problem for companies such as Air France and KLM when they come to Dakar and they want to be 100% sure that the water that they're onboarding is safe to drink? We can do that by just purifying it. And we can go over and above it by sending them notification using IoT system to show the quality of the water at each given time. So before they land, they receive a message to say, this is the water you're about to onboard, this is the quality of the water. So now we can apply IoT systems, we can start to apply things such as machine learning to allow us to constantly monitor that system and allow for the system to get better over time. So that solution that we have, that we wanted to apply it to communities, now we're applying it to a corporate to solve their problem. So we can also do that in the meantime with our solutions that we're developing while we wait to get a provincial government.
You and I should become friends. There's money in water. It's now a tradable commodity, I see on the NASDAQ. That's insane. I've got a question over there. Can we just get the microphone to the gentleman up there, the gentleman next to him? I'm still willing to take a third hand from this side of the room. It doesn't seem that there is. Okay, right over there to the lady over there.
All right, thank you so much. So my name is Joseph from 123 Tutors. Thank you for the shout out, Oliver. So mine is more of a suggestion and or a challenge rather. So I heard that the reason why there's lack of funding in the seed phase is because, as opposed to America and all these established economies, if an investor comes early, there's a high chance that there'll be another investor that will help him learn from those mistakes and take the business forward. Whereas if someone comes early in South Africa or Africa as a whole and you lose that initial investment, there's a lower chance that someone will come and help you learn from those mistakes, because as startups will learn and improve, it's not that the moment you fail, that's the end of the business.
Fantastic. To the gentleman to his right.
Thank you. My name is Zipo from the Technology Innovation Agency. Mine is a concern, and maybe I'll put it out there for innovators like Murendeni to reflect on. Why is it so easy to say the issue is fragmentation rather than business development? Not every innovator is a great entrepreneur. You guys developing these solutions does not mean that you have what it takes to take them to market. So yesterday I asked the innovator, who I've been monitoring for the last 2 years. They've been moving from one incubation to the next and winning awards globally. I said to them, have you been to Tshwane Municipality? They said yes. I said, we are up the road from Tshwane Municipality. Who did you take from the Technology Innovation Agency to Tshwane Municipality, so that Tshwane Municipality understands that the solution that you have is something that the Department of Science and Innovation, through TIA, has invested in? They said, no, I didn't think of that. I said, how do you think you are going to win over government if you don't understand the importance of lobbying stakeholders, relevant stakeholders, when you enter these negotiations? It is critical to understand the clientele that you service, especially government, and how government works. You need the right people to take these ideas to your would-be clients.
Great. And to the lady just below him.
I'm going to qualify this with the proviso that I have a love-hate relationship with corporates. I've worked in them for most of my life, but I keep going back and then running away because things are wrong. But honestly, in my view, in SA and large parts of Africa, corporates have filled a gap that government hasn't been able to provide for their own business interests. How do we stop the vilification of corporates sometimes with entrepreneurs? Yes, you get the please call me's, but you also get partnerships. How do we get entrepreneurs to actually understand that without corporate support in a lot of cases in Africa, you're not going to succeed?
Great. Those are the three, two comments and one question we have, and I'm going to give the panel a chance to respond to it, and in it incorporate your closing remarks. We'll start from your side, Lelemba, and move this way.
So I'll start with the lady's question. I think that more and more within incubators and accelerators, there's the education piece that is really putting corporate as part of the fundraising journey, because they really are. You know, a lot of entrepreneurs will start with your family and friends as your first investors, and most of the time your second investor is going to be a corporate buying from you as you're figuring out your model. Particularly in technology, where entrepreneurs might take some time to figure out their B2C, business to customer model. Big corporates really provide a lot of B2B support, whether it's buying from you or even sponsoring some of your users to use your product. And so I think that it's changing, and we're in the startup space. There's a lot of talk around how corporates can support. A lot of them sponsor these accelerators and incubators in the first place. So I believe it's changing. So I guess it's just more about how do we continue that education, that they are seen as a big piece of how you get the type of growth that will make you even more attractive to a venture capital institution. So it's changing.
Fantastic. Murendeni?
Yeah, so I think for us, it took us COVID to come and hit very hard to realize that this is actually where our business is going. So one of the things that I would say when it comes to open innovation, especially for entrepreneurs, is that it's so it's very, very helpful when you look at exactly where your money is coming from, in a sense, or exactly where your biggest clients are. We didn't realize until last year that actually corporates are our best friends. When we started studying our numbers for the last couple of years, we realized that 90% of our income comes from other businesses, 10% comes from our end users, but we spend probably 70% of our time at our end users when we don't spend as much time with 90% of our business. So we started spending 95% of our time building and nourishing our corporate relationships. And it's so amazing I think it's such a good point to think corporates, just like big organizations, are people. At the end of the day, it's people that are inside those organizations, and the building that relationship with them is really what's going to bring the big value that we're looking for. People with feelings and with emotions, and they are also just as excited about innovation as everybody else is. And they're always willing to take up innovation. So building relationship with corporates is really, for me, what our biggest change was. So between and after COVID, our business has grown by 350%.
Wow.
And all of our focus has become on building relationships with the corporates that we work with. We've got 6 accounts with big corporate. That's where I spend most of my time at, building my relationship with my corporate partners, because I realize it's people, it's Lerato, it's a person, and that's the person that desperately wants to bring innovation to their organization and to provide water for the community that they serve and the community that they work in. And that's where we play. And I think for me, that's the biggest innovation for me.
That's amazing, man. Marie-Francoise, your closing remarks. That's a brilliant comment. Thank you so much.
I want to pick on two. First of all, the point of the first gentleman. You mentioned failure. I think it's very important because actually 3 years ago, I spent a week in the Silicon Valley with all the managers and the president of the World Bank. And we went to Google, Facebook, Uber, LinkedIn. And I think that what struck me when you go at Facebook, at the entrance, you have actually, in the entrance, all the failed projects. So there is kind of the celebration of failure, whereas, in school, you are always pushed back, you are a failure, you cannot, you don't have a second chance. So I think that we need, even from school, to kind of change this mindset, saying that failure is probably a step. I myself used to say failure is not an option, and I don't say it anymore, because I do see that you can learn a lot from failure. The second is the gentleman from TIA. I think that I hope one thing that we can take from this conversation, and that each of us would say, let me act on this, is this notion of really having a platform of the information is made available. Because of course you are saying, you need to understand the government. But government needs to make an effort to say, where is information? How do we make it, user-friendly, in maybe several languages? I mean, I don't have the detail here. Does it make sense if you have somebody in a remote Eastern Cape, how they will access that? So I think, honestly, I believe that the effort of bringing the information together, showing the successes, the ones that are existing, and having, this role model, would probably, incentivize, the young person in the township, say, oh, wow, he has been able to do that. Maybe I can do something, So let us work together and not say it's the fault of the private public. Let us bring together and have a community of transformation, which is what is required to make, first of all, the company and the society of the 21st century, and more importantly, the post-COVID one. And I'm glad to hear from you that you are saying that actually, your business has tripled. The opportunities are there. There will be losses, but there are new openings that we all need to see how to nurture and to capture.
Jean-Claude, we're about 4 minutes over time. You've got 2 minutes to wrap it up for us.
I will just answer to the question about how do we make understand to the entrepreneur and the startup that corporate are not enemies. First, by being in such an area between where basically in such a forum with Africa Arena or others, where we can put at the same time corporate and startup, I think is the first point. Secondly, also to walk the talk. That means when we have external venturing, as we have, for example, in Saint-Gobain, but is in many groups in reality to embark with and to discuss and to what can I say, to to work with startup. And lastly, don't forget something, most of the corporate, my corporate is 350 years more old, but it has started by an entrepreneur. It has started by a guy that get a technology, an idea, in this case was to make glass. And in reality, all corporates have been entrepreneur first. And so sometime, they become a bit too big at a certain moment. But in any case, we are people, and we have the same interests. I think the idea for us is to grow together. That's all.
Fantastic. Round of applause for our panel, everybody. Thank you so much for your inputs. Really, really appreciate it. Murendeni, thank you so much. Lelemba, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Marie-Francoise, thank you so much for your time. Jean-Claude, fantastic insights.
Thanks to Oliver. Give him a round of applause. Great moderator indeed.